Good evening. This is On the Campaign Trail. Every week we track key issues, moments, and personalities in the long run up to Election Day. But we want to be clear about the map that we use. We know that the democratic project is in great danger, and that shapes how we navigate our way to 2022. It isn't just elections as usual. On the campaign trail seeks to make sense of the 2022 elections. We will try to discern patterns in the election landscape, determine paths to victory, discuss relevant policies, seek useful perspectives, all while keenly aware that the anti democratic clock is ticking. In 2022, hashtag we decide, without neglecting the other basic questions. On the campaign trail, we'll ask how we decide and why we decide. I'm John Nery, and you are on the campaign trail. In the latest Social Weather Station's election preferences survey from October, we see that a consolidation in the presidential race is taking place. In first place, for the first time, is Ferdinand Marcos Jr. There must be many factors behind the new frontrunner status for Marcos Jr. But tonight, we want to focus on the Marcos political brand. What is the nature of the appeal of the Marcoses? Where is this appeal rooted? What are its limits? In our first segment, we are joined by the most dominant non presidential politician from Northern Luzon in the last two generations. Mayor of Narvacan, Chavit Singson was governor of Ilocos Sur for a total of almost 30 years. He took over the provincial capital for the first time when he was only 30 years old, and that was 50 years ago. Today, Chavit Singson is the president of the League of Municipalities of the Philippines. Mayor Chavit, welcome and good evening.
Good evening, John, and good evening to all your listeners.
Maraming salamat, Mayor Chavit. Um, Napansin ko almost half of the time you served as Ilocos Sur governor, around 14 years. The president was Ferdinand Marcos. What was he like? How did he treat you? What was your working relationship like?
When I was newly elected as governor of Ilocos Sur, I was against President Marcos because we are the opposition. Because the Crisolicos at that time were the governor, congressman, and they were the leaders of President Marcos. So it's natural that I'm in the opposition. It all started when I was young. I was able to buy the electric plant for the province, big
Mhm.
an electric light company, but it's history already.
That's right.
And in short, they took it, and then I won in the Supreme Court. I got it, but again, when martial was declared, I gave it away for the cooperative, for the people. They were trying to convince me to get it, but no, I said it's for the people. So it's now the cooperative of the province of Ilocos. So it started that way. I
Mhm.
was in the opposition. But later on, when they declared martial law, again, they tried to remove me. But luckily, when the reports of maybe the people around him, if you remove Chavit Singson, there will be chaos again in Ilocos. And at that time,
Mhm.
President Marcos doesn't want any problem. So I was spared for being removed during martial law. Then later on,
Yes.
after 8 years, no election, we became friends with Imelda. And
Mhm.
Imelda started coming to visit me in Vegan. And then eventually, we became friends, all of us, because there's no more election.
But that was decades ago,
Yes,
Governor.
yes.
What explains the continuing appeal of the Marcos family name even up to 2021? Sa tingin
Yeah.
nyo?
Well, actually, he did a lot of good things, President Marcos. I think this time, with all the issues against the Marcoses, I think the time has come for Bongbong Marcos to be the president. Parang panahon na niya eh. So everywhere, I've been in politics for a long time. This is my first time to experience yung feelings ng mga tao. Everywhere he goes, you can feel the people. Tumatalon pa sila, umiiyak. Parang yung charisma niya iba eh. Iba sa other politicians that I've been to. But I think ang panahon niya na ngayon, mas anong gawin mo, siraan siya, lalong lumalakas. So
Go.
oh, yes.
Yeah, very recently you joined the Nationalist People's Coalition. I
Yes,
think
yes.
officially walang kandidato ang NPC, but
Yes,
of
yes.
course the party leader is Tito Soto running for vice
Yes,
president as running
yes,
mate of Ping Lacson.
yes.
So does this mean you are not supporting Senator Lacson?
No, siyempre, Senator Ping Lacson, hindi naman siya NPC. And uh, when I joined NPC, di ko naman alam yung mga kandidato. So, actually, all my problem is all of them are my friends. Ping Lacson,
Mhm.
hindi ko naman akalain na tatakbong presidente nung nagpunta ako sa NPC.
Mhm.
And hindi ko alam din yung mga ibang kandidato. So, nung nangyari na lahat, that's a big problem in my part because Ping Lacson is also close to me. Pero palagi ko nang sinasabi, pagpipila natin, dalawa lang eh. Because to be a president, to be a candidate for president, you must be well educated and well experienced. Kako, dalawa lang meron dyan. Si Bongbong Marcos at saka si Ping Lacson. Sila lang ang well experienced. So, dalawa lang pagpipila natin ako. It just so happened that I'm from the North. And I don't know, but the whole North is still supporting the Marcoses. Even before, nandiyan pa rin yung Marcos magic. So, parang bumalik na lang sa ngayon sa pagtakbo ni Bongbong Marcos.
Gov, I understand you are in Davao right now on
Yes.
official business for the League of Municipalities of the Philippines. But are you also touching base with the people with behind Mayor Sara Duterte or the campaign office of Senator Bongbong Marcos?
No, nakataon lang na lumalabas kami sa, although it's pandemic, it's not
Mm-hmm.
allowed yung national convention or
Mm-hmm.
meeting. So ginagawa namin regional just to help the municipalities, especially the small municipalities. Maski may pandemic, we have to go around to help our members. So umiikot kami by region, which is allowed by the IAF, the IAF, the TF. So regional, but today, yesterday, hanggang ngayon, yun ang last stop namin dahil Mindanao lang hindi natapos. Kinuha na namin isang Mindanao. So all the Mindanaos, majority of the Mindanao mayors are here.
Mm-hmm.
So that nag-start kami kahapon.
Gov, are you on a listening tour? Listening to the mayors, see kung sino yung susuportahan nila? Or are you already on campaign mode?
No, although maraming lumapit, hindi ko sinasabi sa mga, ang sinabi ko sa mga mayors, marami nang lumapit, pero ayaw ko mag-decide kung hindi ko po yung makonsulta ka ako. So, napag-usapan namin sa lahat ng region kung anong gusto nyo para malaman ko rin ang pulso ng taong bayan. So, karamihan ng region, yun naman ang majority, they're supporting uh, Bongbong Marcos and Mayor Inday Sara. Noong umpisa kasi dyan, decided kami lahat by supporting Mayor Sara.
Mhm.
But nung nagsabi siya na hindi na siya tatakbo, si Bongbong pumapayag naman nung nag-usap kami, tatakbo si Mayor Inday Sara, bababa siya as Vice President.
Mhm.
So yun ang buong akala namin. Nung hindi na tumakbo si Mayor Sara, tuloy-tuloy na si Bongbong Marcos for President. Kung nung ayaw ni Mayor Sara, we're all decided to support Senator Bongo. So,
Mhm.
hindi naman namin akalain na tatakbo si Mayor Inday Sara. So, doon kami nagkaroon ng problema. Hanggang ngayon, naipit kami lahat. Karamihan naipit. Of
Totoo nga,
course,
'no,
yung
nagkaipitan,
problema,
ano?
nagkaipitan, problema talaga
Oo.
yan. So, we're just
Ah,
waiting also for the decision of the President kung sinong
Gov,
susuportahan niya.
gusto ko lang malaman, nagpaalam ka na kay Senate President Tito Soto na kandidato mo si Bongbong, hindi si Ping?
No, hindi naman. Dahil nga wala sa usapan namin noon. Hindi ko naman akalain yung mga tatakbong presidente noon.
Mhm.
Pero
Mhm.
si Ping Lacson ang unang nagpunta sa bahay noon with si Soto.
Mhm.
So, hindi ko naman alam na si Bongbong Marcos. So, very big diferensya yan because I'm from the North. If
Mhm.
ganun ang Pilipino eh. If you're from the North, nakakaya naman din mo suportahan yung tao sa North. So, yun ang nangyari. Although malapit na kaibigan din si Ping Lacson,
Mhm.
naiya nga ako sa kanya pero maintindihan niya yun dahil I'm from the North. Nung pumunta
Gov, can
siya
I
sa
ask
bahay,
you,
yes,
nabanggit mo kanina, sabi mo parang bumabalik yung Marcos magic. Anong
yes.
ibig mong sabihin nun? What is Marcos magic?
Well, parang nung
Pera
panahon
ba yan?
na,
Pera?
no,
Pera?
no, no, hindi,
Poder?
no,
Ano ba?
no, yung mga nagawa niya, marami naman nagawa eh, si President Marcos. Although I'm in the opposite side before, talagang
Mhm.
marami naman nagawa for our country. Uh, Ewan ko na lang kung yung mga sumunod na pangyayari, maraming issues.
Mhm.
Pero mas yan na anong pinahid nila, karamihan naman na-dismiss at wala naman napatunayan na ninakaw niya ang mga pera nila. Yung sinasabi nila, pinagsamantala ng central bank. On record, wala naman nawala central bank eh, mga gold na sinasabi. Ang sa akin lang pananaw, para sa akin lang
Mhm.
pagkaintindi the whole story, nagnegosyo si President Marcos nung senator pa ng gold. Ang problema yata, because he's a politician, which is nangyayari sa lahat ng politician, hindi niya dineclare yung mga gold niya. So, yun ang dineposito sa buong mundo. Hindi yan na-declare. Nung sinabi
Ah,
nila ako, yun ang yung pinag-uusapan ngayon. Wala naman nawala sa Central Bank ng mga gold.
Salamat, Gov. Actually, marami ding research na nagpapakita na mukhang hindi naman tama yung ganong klaseng accounting. But I'm not interested in that right now. No? Gusto kong
Yes.
pag-usapan si Marcos Jr. So sabi mo
Yes.
parang nauulit yung Marcos magic. May sinasabi ka, may charisma si Bongbong. Ah, ang gusto ko malaman, at tapos nabanggit mo, the Marcos Magic consists in the first place of the achievements of the father. Ano
Yes.
ano po yung achievements nung son?
Well, yung kaiba sila eh. Si Marcos lumalaban niya, pero si Bongbong hindi siya palaban. I mean, ah, ayaw niyang labanan yung mga nagpapatingo sa kanya. Focus lang siya sa mga pagbabago sinasabi niya, yung pagkakaisa.
Would you
Parang lumalabas, parang underdog pa nga. Dahil pag binabanata siya, lumalabas siya. So I think,
may balita na ayaw daw niyang sumali sa mga debates, sa presidential debates. Kung kayo po advisor niya, would you advise him to join the presidential debates?
well, ako, oo, okay lang. Palagay ko, okay naman siya sa mga ganyan. Presidential debate. Kaya-kaya niya yun because he's well educated and well experienced. He became vice governor, congressman, senator. So, alam niya ang kilos. So, I think that's a problem kung magkakaroon ng debate lahat ng mga presidential candidates.
Gov, you're about 15 years older than Marcos Jr. and you've known him for decades, and you've known his sister Amy also for decades.
Yes.
Matanong po kita, sa dalawa, sa kanilang dalawa, who is the most like the father?
Well,
Si Amy or si
Bongbong,
Bongbong?
Bongbong, at saka pareho sila. Pareho sila. Pareho naman na matalino yung dalawa. So para sa akin, okay lang sa halos pareho sila.
Gov, I only asked for 15 minutes of your time. I know you're very busy.
Yes.
So let me just ask one last question. Ano? Um, in your 50 years in politics, what have you learned from Marcos that you apply in your own political career?
Um, well, ang ano ko kay wala naman akong sinasabing ginagaya ko si Marcos. Malayo ako doon. Ang ginagawa ko lang is always reconciliation. Right after election, I reach out to all my enemies. So lahat ng mga nakalabang ko sa policy, nag-uusap na kami, including the Crisologos, including President Erap Estrada.
That's
So
right.
yun lang, simple lang. Nagre-reach out ako at nagre-reconcile. Kasi mahirap yung nagpapatakbo ka ng isang, like for example, ng province o isang bagay, tapos divided ang tao. So, yun palagay ko ang isang nagawa ko. And aside from that, nagkaroon ng pagkakataon ng Ilocos, yung ginawa kong, I went to Congress just once to make a law, the excise tax of cigarettes.
That's right. That's right.
15% of that goes back to the tobacco producing provinces. Yun ang nagbibigay ng pundo sa lahat ng mga buong Ilocania up to now. Tuwing tinatas ang taxes, matas ang share namin because 15% of all these taxes of cigarettes will go back to the tobacco producing provinces.
Gov, sorry, one last question kung okay lang
Yes,
sa'yo.
yes.
Where is Ferdinand Marcos Jr. weak? Saan yung mga weaknesses niya as a presidential candidate?
Wala naman. Wala, malakas siya as a person. Pero ayaw lang niya yung inaaway, hinahamon or ano, pinapabayaan lang niya yun ang napansin ko sa kanya. Unlike others na lumalaban, wala namang mangyayari dyan sa laban-laban eh. So focus lang siya sa ano niya, unity, pagkakaisa, pagbabangon ng ating bansa. Focus lang siya ron. Yun ang malaking difference nila ng mag-ama. Ang ama niya noon, palaban yun, hamunin mo, mga laban. Pero siya, very understanding, approachable, ibang charisma niya.
This has been a very instructive 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Mayor Chavit Singson, President of the League of Municipalities of the Philippines. Sir, thank you very much for your time.
Maraming salamat din, John, at saka kay Marga, maraming salamat sa pagkakataon.
Thank you. In our second segment, we invited two public intellectuals, the sociologist Ash Presto and the writer Frank Simatu, to join us in an analysis of the same subject, the Marcos political brand. Both of them, like Mayor Singson, hail from uh, northern Luzon. I'm very happy that they were able to make time for us. Frank is joining us from Baguio, and Ash is joining us from Singapore. Uh, Ash, Frank,
Yeah.
welcome.
Hello, Frank and John. I'm happy to be here.
Hi.
Good
So
evening
I
from Baguio.
Good evening. So I wanted to ask each of you, what is the source of the? Oh wait, no. I have a better question. In 1995, Bongbong Marcos ran for the Senate and lost. In 2010, he ran for the Senate again and won handily. My question to the two of you: what happened between those two elections? What happened in that 15-year gap? Maybe Ash first.
I think I should have to declare that in the year 1995 I wasn't even born yet. So I'm Generation Z. So I like to think that's what I can bring to the table at the moment. The sort of like the youth perspective. So in 1995, I can only assume that this was when dissent against the Marcos brand of leadership was also strong. Um, and after and when you lose an election and then you have some years to take a back seat and then consolidate your forces and then plan again, look or examine what went wrong in your campaign and then try to forward a stronger campaign in the next time that you run. So later on we'll get to talk about how the 2022 elections will be a very different campaign for Bongbong Marcos as opposed to the
Mhm.
2016 elections where he lost. So right now, because of my generation's identity, what I can say is that well maybe in the second time that he ran for the Senate, he had
Mhm.
more consolidated forces. He was able to learn from the mistakes or from the shortcomings from his last election bid and then was able to get a seat. And the assumption here is that all things considered equal, ay hindi nagbago yung political atmosphere at that time because you should also consider how different political atmospheres from different administrations can also fuel, make or break aspiring senators campaign and even here an aspiring president's campaign, which I'm sure we'll get to talk about later on.
Thank you, Frank.
Um, my first assignment was actually the burial of Marcos, old Marcos. Syempre. So, what can I say? When I went there, biglang I saw a cult, ano? A Marcos cult. A real Marcos cult. Ano? So, feeling ko, because I'm from Batak as well, ano? My mother's from Batak. So, I stayed longer than the most of the journalists. And I learned that the, the oldest cult there was 1969, which is
Mhm.
like, oh, tagal na, no? So, talagang it's a real cult of personality. There are five cults, I counted them. And one of them even came out with a scapular of Marcos, no? And then sabi nung nakausap ko, si Marcos mismo ang nag-post. So, he actually cultivated it.
Mhm.
And then I remember
I think
wait, I'm back.
okay.
Sorry. May
All right.
problema itong Converge. Anyway, 10 years ago, I recalled na yung unang uh, Marcos group in Facebook came out. So,
Mhm.
hindi pa uso yung using Facebook group as a political tool. Meron na
Mhm.
si Marcos. So, it grew and grew. And then yung mga unang, because I'm only there to to get pictures of yung mga old
Mhm.
Marcos. So, ang una ko napansin doon, puro Marcos and Bongbong. So, laging sila magkasama. So, habi ko, parang I'm not surprised na ganito ang tingin ngayon kay Marcos na siya yung heir apparent. Siya yung, kung si Marcos ang God the Father, siya yung God the Son. So,
Okay. Who is?
talagang it's all cultivated.
I'm afraid to ask who is Marcos the Holy Ghost. Um, Frank, if I can ask a follow-up question, do you think this was the plan all along? Way back in the 1990s, early 90s, when they were allowed to return to the Philippines, that the plan really was to reclaim the presidency and reclaim it through Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Do you think that was the plan all along?
Well, I interviewed Imelda and then sinabi niya, he told their children to lagi kayong tumakbo. Otherwise, pag hindi tayo tatakbo, papatayin tayo. So, doon pa lang, malalaman mo na it's really, they have to be in the limelight all the time. I think they followed it naman, so they're always there. And I think it's
That-
not even an accident na na ito na, I mean, cultivated talaga yung nangyayari. So they never got out of the, I mean, out the limelight. Di ba?
That's right. I mean, they've always had the regional bailiwicks, no, in Leyte and in Ilocos Norte. But what made 2010 different was that it was the first time they won national office since, in fact, Marcos was president. But of course, 9 years later, in 2019, Aimee won her own term of office in the Senate. Ash, I have a question for you. Do you think what happened in the 15 years between 1995 and 2010 uh, had something to do with what Frank referenced here, no? The rise of social media. Nabanggit niyo yung Facebook. Of course, wala pang Facebook noong 1995. Lumabas lang ng 2004. But especially in the in the first decade and a half of the 21st century, I think we've seen a lot of pro Marcos content on social media. Do you think that helps
In
explain
other words, may manager ka.
his
At
victory
may
in 2010?
30%. May 30%. Pati ka naman
Well,
pumasok
I will make a disclaimer
bayad ka
again
ng
here because
200 pesos.
in 2004 I was in elementary school, so I wasn't even allowed to set up a Facebook account. But what I can say is that social media really does bring different challenge and also forward. It's also a very strong driver of a certain politician's campaign. So I would also want to circle back to one of your questions a while ago. If the Marcos family planned to quote unquote reclaim the presidency. Well, ang
Mhm.
basa ko dyan, ay it's not a reclamation because a lot of uh, a lot of people will tell you that in their minds it was theirs from the start. So why would you reclaim something that you had to give up because they didn't ha- they never relinquish it in their mind. It's something that they are entitled to, and we can also see that in how Marcus Jr. runs his campaign right now. So he doesn't attend, he doesn't even plan to attend different debates, as what you've mentioned a while ago. Is actually looking at searching for different interviews that Marcus Jr. did with credible media way back since 2005, or since we have record from YouTube, but you have very limited interviews, and I wonder why that's the case. And the interviews that appear on YouTube searches are interviews with vloggers right now, with influencers that obviously have feeded questions. So it seems like, as compared to different candidates really fielding different platforms, doing all of this research, forwarding different advocacies and campaigns, it's as if like Marcus Jr. only have to repeat all of these very motherhood statements, very general statements, avoid follow-up questions, and then expect, like, by lying down repeating all of these motherhood statements, the magical guava or apple of presidency would fall right um to his mouth. So parang hihiga lang siya nga tsaka andyan na ulit yung presidency. Kanya na yan. So, um, yun yung tingin ko doon sa assertion on them having to reclaim it, because it's not as if, oh, let's plan to reclaim it. It was part of the general scheme of things all along. It was part of the entitlement that Marcos Jr. was afforded to ever since he was young. And you see that in how, the father and the son always get photographed together. If you look at the historical photographs and the biographies, right? So in terms of social media, you can see that has always been the case. It has always been utilized by different politicians, not just Marcos, to forward their campaigns. Of course, we can think about Pinoy in 2010, how he won the elections. You have Facebook. I remember it. I was in high school. And I remember my high school batchmates like posting how Cory Aquino was such a good mother, how Noynoy Aquino is going to follow the footsteps of his mother. So what I can say is that social media can be a powerful tool, although I cannot attest to how Facebook has been so beneficial to the campaign of Bongbong Marcos in 2004, because I didn't have any Facebook at that time. If I would announce it, then Facebook might delete my own Facebook account because it's a big intention. Breach of policy, ganon.
Mhm. Um, I'm glad you brought up the point about controlled media exposure of Bongbong Marcos. I think certainly that has been the case. I mean, many people have been remarking on that now. There is a very real possibility that he will skip the COMELEC sponsored debates. And what I hear you saying is that that's partly an expression of the very entitlement that he feels, no, towards the office of the president. But I think that's also partly because right now he's enjoying front runner status. If he were trailing badly, he would be among the first to demand time in nationally televised debates. My question for Frank is, Frank, this strategy of silence, of controlled media appearances by Bongbong, as a veteran journalist, do you think this will in fact work? I mean, it's still 5.5 months
Wala
to
talaga.
the election.
Wala siyang gagas.
Well, sabi ko nga, we're actually coming out with Roland. Roland's with me right now. We're coming out with a new second version, second book volume. It's about the ballad of Malakas and Maganda, which is
Okay.
how the Marcoses controlled the media to for their own. Ano? Kasi like what? Before there was that
Okay.
had
Uh,
yeah, do you know that Ginuit na Tadhana? I
yes,
think
of
that's a
course.
movie
Yeah, the
of
film.
Luis Gonzalez and Jay Ilagan as Bongbong, di ba? So, nandun na yung dun pa lang, talagang there's the destiny na to be running. Ano. And then also, if you notice, kahit na quiet siya ngayon, the Duterte public intellectuals like Thinking Pinoy and all these people were actually Bongbong's army, not really Duterte, if you look at it. So they're the ones talking for him. So I'm not sure if he's really quiet. He's just there. Marami sa mga gabels. Ano. So they're doing the job for him right now.
Okay, thanks. I want to ask the two of you, is it possible to classify different types of Marcos Jr. supporters today? And if you do an anatomy of Marcos support, I mean, what will we see? Is it all just members of the cults of personality that you've discovered, Frank, or is there's something else? Earlier, our guest was Chavit Singson. He was
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
he's from the north. He has no choice. Well, not really no choice, but uh, he feels compelled to vote for Marcos. So can we speak of
Yeah, yeah. There's one.
types of
Yeah, of course, there's the ones from the north who thought na parang tapos ng Davao. It's back to us again. So there's one, ano, yun yung nakita ko. And then, ito na naman yung mga OFWs who's really out of touch. I'm not really, really out of touch, but they don't know what's happening in the ground. Ano? And then there are ito naman yung mga nostalgic. Ano? So
Okay.
these are the old people who think that martial law must have been good. So ito yung mga tatlo nakikita ko. And then yung lately, ito yung mga I remember I attended UP last one of those talking in UP Third World Studies. And then,
Uh-huh.
nabigla ako doon, kami, kasama ko yung mga ibang mga then biglang may mga pumasok na parang ang feeling nila, bakit ang sama ng tingin nyo sa martial law? Baka naman may pinatago kayo. So yun ang lagi ko marinig ng time. So baka yun pa na parang why are we always getting the bad side of martial law? Bakit naman may maganda nangyari? I was surprised na may ganung reaction. Ano? So ito yung
Yeah.
nakikita ko ngayon na parang nakakulang talaga. May effect talaga yung pagkawala ng Philippine history sa curriculum natin.
Yeah, that's probably right. Frank, I'm really loving the very Baguio vibe from you today. I mean, like you're in a coffee shop. There's artwork behind you. I mean, that's really Baguio, no? A haven for public intellectuals. Ash, so Frank identified four possible sources or categories of Marcos supporters. Would you like to add to these categories? So he.
Well, I would like to more expound actually.
Mhm.
I think agree ako dun sa sinabi ni Frank. But before I do that, before I expound, I would
Sure.
also like to expound on what you mentioned a while ago about controlled silence and controlled
Mhm.
media appearances
Mhm.
and quietness, because I also agree with Frank that it's not as if it's a silent per se, it's silence per se, because you see their supporters. Marcos Jr. never came out, just like what Lenny Robredo did. She never came out and told his supporters to quiet down, to be more patient in
Mhm.
engaging with other people, especially with other people who will vote for different candidates. Only Lenny Robredo came out to do that. So in terms of silence, like a lot of his supporters will say, "Oh, si Bongbong Marcos kahit na kung ano-ano ibato mo sa kanya, hindi siya pumapatol kasi
Mhm.
alam naman niya walang patutunguhan yan kasi bias kayo sa kanya." Well, una, he himself will not do the speaking, but you see his supporters doing that, and you see that the supporters are being empowered to do so. I don't know where they get their resources to keep on researching and then slapping all of these people with all of these documents and then falsified claims. So the supporters are not silent, and then Marcus Jr. himself never came out to tell his
Mhm.
supporters to be more patient in terms of engagement. So I would not say that it is silence, but it is strategic silence in that sense. And it's very important to mention how he is controlling his media appearances, because as we all know, way back in 2016, all of these vice presidential debates, we got a lot of memes for that. We saw how his opponents at that time were able to, you know, turn all of the questions on its head and then throw it back to Bongbong Marcos, and Bongbong Marcos, of course, was not able to defend himself, which produced a lot of memes, which also maybe pointed as the reason that his percentages in the surveys actually went down, because he was the front runner for vice president way back in 2016. So moving on to the typology, so to speak,
Mhm.
of the supporters of Bongbong Marcos right now, I would agree that a lot of supporters have this nostalgia for an authoritarian rule. As what Frank mentioned a while ago, I would also agree that a lot of his supporters are Ilocanos, as what politician Chavit Singson mentioned a while ago. And I would
Mhm.
also further expound that saying solid north doesn't exist actually is more for the advocates rather than the people you're trying to hamigin dun sa political discussions, right? Because you need to have a battle cry. You need to be able to boost the morale of the supporters of other candidates, and not just VP Lenny Robredo, because we also have Ilocano supporters of Isko Moreno, of Manny Pacquiao, right?
Mhm.
And saying there's no solid north is, boosts the morale, because if you look at the numbers, especially in the 2016 vice presidential elections, you see that the votes for Bongbong Marcos is really, a solid vote. Like majority of the votes in Ilocos, and even in Ilocano speaking areas in Mindanao, actually came out very positively for Bongbong Marcos. So you see that, the support is there. Um, but it's not 100% support. There are gaps, and the gaps are there for the advocates, especially for people fighting for human rights, to consolidate among their ranks and then boost the morale of each other, keep on fighting. Especially as you mentioned a while ago, that now it's not just elections as usual. I
Mhm.
feel like it's the elections of my life, with all of the pandemic. It's very crucial, and all
Mhm.
of the records of human rights violations at the moment. And then you see that, this person coming from a family who has been one of the foremost human rights violators in the history of the Philippines, is topping the presidential campaign. So it's really very concerning and alarming, especially in our generation. And then, yung third one, yung mga nagpapaniwala sa mga fake news sa Facebook. And it's really hard to blame all of these people, especially given that there is a lack of civic engagement programs, there's a lack of voters engagement programs in the Philippines. There's also a pushback against voters education programs, not only from the administration side, but also from the opposition side, because of how derogatory the voters education might be. It's as if that you
Mhm.
see that you're saying that the voters are the people that we blame for
Mhm.
having elected all of these people. So we have to educate the voters. But how about the politicians, right? So it should be civic education, which is more complicated to do, which requires more systemic solutions, which of course, without the political will of people sitting now in power, it's very difficult to implement. And then the third one, yung mga nagpapaniwala sa fake news, and then the fourth one, yung mga mahina sa history. Basically, they're all symptoms of the same disease, which is like lack of political will to forward civic engagement in the Philippines. We have a lot of history subjects, CBK, kasi CAS 1, CAS 2, even in college. But the way that we teach it is just plain memorization, because at the end of the day, also, history is not really seen as a very viable career, even for Filipinos. Like, I remember I was such a history nerd when I was in high school. But a lot of people will tell me, bakit ka mag-history? Walang pera dyan. Mag-memorize ka lang ng dates dyan. So the kind of teaching of history is also very faulty. It's not just the lack of it, but also the kind of history that we teach to our students. So those four things, I also agree. I just expounded on them. Yun lang po.
Thanks. Frank Ash raised many excellent points. I want to zero in on one of the things that she said. She said she doesn't know where the resources come from. I want to ask you, is Marcos money a real factor in 2020?
Yeah,
What do
I
you
think
see?
so. I was able to cover Ilocos Norte at the time. Hindi nga ako eh. Uh, Hindi nga nagbibigay ng pera on election day. Eh. They give money for 3 months. So, pasweldo na yung ginagawa sa Ilocos Norte. So,
Mhm.
there must be money. I don't know where it's coming from. And yun nga, I mean, he's behind the social media of Duterte. So, may pera talaga siguro sila. I don't know where it's really coming from. Maybe nakatago naman yung mga Talyano gold siguro.
Frank, can you also talk a little bit more about the five cults that you've covered?
Yeah, there's one is the oldest, they call it the Gold Eagle, ano? It's actually in Tondo. And
Mhm.
then there are two in Pangasinan, and then one in Nueva Ecija. So ito siguro yung mga millenarian cults, ano? Ito yung,
Mhm.
ang feeling ko, ito yung mga Sagrado di Corazon Sagrado de mga ganun na issue. And then there's two na, one is in Leyte. So I think it's going to be
SNM
the
naman, maganda ng
Imelda
date.
Mystique
Oo,
naman, ano?
Uh-huh.
There's one na Ilocos. So iba-iba yung
And in
gagawin.
these cults, Marcos Senior is treated as divine.
As
Pag
the
may
guy.
nagaya naman sa yung SNM,
Yun
huwag
nga,
ka
yung
papayag. Hindi
tinadhana.
SM ang
So,
ibig sabihin mo.
actually,
Oh, as a man of destiny.
Baka
there
ikaw
is a poor
matatuwa.
cup of all this. I mean, like, Tipulo, been there, done that kasi Marcos, no? Well, that's how they see it in Ilocos. Kaya nga, hindi naman talaga nanalo si Duterte sa North Luzon.
SD lang naman.
Nanalo lang siya sa Ilocos Norte because of
That's right.
Marcos. And then if
That's
you
right.
look at it, tama si, well, there was no solid North after Marcos Senior. So, nung time ni
Hayaan mo na. Nag-work naman yun.
FBR, iba-iba din yung binoto eh. I mean, Imelda Ran. So, she
That's right.
won in Apayao and Cagayan, I think. And Ilocos Norte, of course.
Kasi
Iba yung
Bongo
nanalo
naman,
sa
si Duterte,
Sur.
parang may
La Union, iba din nanalo.
yung devotion
Ganun
mo,
din
bagets
kay
sa
the last
matanda,
itong
di ba
election.
may paliwanag kung saan nanggaling.
Siyempre, Binay won in Cagayan
Hindi naman din sila
and
magkaganyan prior to the election.
those part, Cagayan Valley. And then, Duterte only won in Ilocos
Dahil nagpanalo yung
Norte. Iba yung nanalo sa Ilocos. I think it's and then Grace po won in
Grace.
Pangasinan. So
Pangasinan, that's
iba-iba.
right. Yeah.
So those are, there's no Marcos solid North is wala na yan.
I guess it depends on how you define solid, right? I mean, maybe for Region One, you're looking at 80% voting for Marcos, but in the CAR, you'd be lucky to get 65%, right?
I think he will win in Abra and Kalinga. Apparently Kalinga is so BBM, I don't even know why.
Oh, okay.
Alam mo
But
ang alam ko dito sa Kalinga na Paya, that's why they're so into Marcos. Ano? If you look at the map, mukha ni Ferdinand Jr. Senior yung mapa eh. It's a side view of Marcos Sr. So baka yun ang point. Alam mo, gerrymandering, mandering na nun pa.
Oh wow. Um, my last question for the two of you: do you think at the end of the day, Marcos Jr. will in fact be the next president of the Philippines? I'll start with Frank and then end with Ash.
Uh, well, kaya nga takot sila sa history. Ano, kasi
Ano
you
yung
always see,
Pangasinan ba?
well, yeah, parang
Resilience Dagupan ba?
magiging slayers si
That's
Lenny.
the big
So yun, nandun
It's
din yung takot
converted to
nila.
Philippines.
Kasi if you look at the mistake of Lenny, iba din eh. I mean, I was able to, when I was young, yung nag-member ako ng Cory Aquino for President movement, I never, talagang Marcos noon, ano? Pero ngayon parang may fighting chance na sa North si Lenny. So I'm not
I,
even saying na, sige, may chance naman
I find it very interesting, Frank, that
na,
that the that from Region One alone, Lenny got uh, enough votes that proved to be the margin of victory over Bongbong Marcos. She
and
got over
never
50,000.
she never came to Ilocos at that time. I
Is that
mean,
right?
in Northern Luzon, she never. I remember because I only met the daughter in Baguio, so di
Yeah.
talaga sila
If I'm not
nag-campaign.
mistaken, in the three regions in 2016, she got something like 600,000 votes.
Ay,
More than 250,000 of that came from Pangasinan. And she won over Bongbong Marcos by a margin of a quarter of a million votes. So maybe that was
yeah.
decisive. We're running out of time, so I'm gonna go to Ash with the last question. Ash, do you think we'll see Bongbong preside over the 50th anniversary of martial law as president of the Philippines?
Well, John, the surveys are there, and also you can see the behavior of different, prominent political families and political parties that we have right now, right? So a lot of them are gravitating towards the tandem of Bongo Marcos and Sara Duterte. And you know that our politicians here in the Philippines, they like to gamble and they like to make sure that they win the gamble. And elections is like a game. It's a game. It's a gamble game. It's very exciting, especially for observers like us, sociologists, political scientists. But for politicians themselves, no, they like to win. So if you see them gravitate towards a certain candidate, it's not just for self-preservation, but also because of the need to preserve themselves. They want to make sure that they are betting for the one who will win the elections. The surveys don't lie. Bongbong is number one. The behavior of of politicians, political parties, political families right now, you can see that they are betting on this candidate because this candidate has the highest chance of winning right now. So I would say there's a really, really huge, chance of Bongbong Marcos winning the next elections. And I want to circulate back to what Frank has been mentioning a while ago about Marcos being destined for this position. And it's really hard to go against that. But let me make a disclaimer before I get misquoted. Sinasabi ko lagi sa mga kaibigan ko, grabe, para naman tayong ano yan, para pinagsaklop ng langit at lupa kasi parang may pandemya. So, social media ka magkakampaign, and then Marcos Jr. had, more than 4 or 5 years to consolidate, this kind of disinformation campaign happening on social media right now. So, it's an opportune time for him to utilize what's happening, the exigencies of the moment to forward his campaign. So baka na-reinforce yung pagtingin niya na okay, itinadhana ako dito. Ito yung tadhana ko, but it's also very interesting to point out that all of these people, because Manny Pacquiao has also been using that, I'm destined for this, I'm destined for that. The Lord wants me to lead. Duterte has been using the itinadhana ako, that kind of narrative. When he was running for 2016 elections, and it's always the men who say that. You will never hear a woman saying I'm destined to lead, because that doesn't follow this, that doesn't figure into the gender norms and the gender script that we have at the moment. And because of the gender script, and of course Duterte has strengthened, um, in all of the years that he sat as president, it's also, beneficial towards Bongbong Marcos to forward those gender script, saying itinadhana ako, I'm a masculine leader, being entitled to all of these. I was prepared by my father, and etc. And you see and as a final note, I want to also circle back to the behavior of political campaigns right now, because even politicians, acknowledging the strength of the Ilocos vote, they try to also appease Ilocos voters, because whether we like it or not, Ilocanos, the majority of them are voting for Bongbong Marcos. We see that in previous elections. We see that in the surveys. Yeah, I agree. It depends on how you define solid north. But if you define solid as a really majority vote, then you can see that the solid north is there. The problem with the solid north is that we see that all Ilocanos are for Bongbong Marcos. We fail to see that some Ilocanos can also go against Bongbong Marcos. That's what happened today. The Pudno nga Ilocano, this group of Ilocanos filed the petition to cancel the candidacy of Bongbong Marcos. But if you fight against Solid North as a majority vote, you can see how politicians behave in order to appease the Ilocos vote. The Ilocos vote, cultural capital of Ilocanos, is really, really huge. You have Grace Po in 2016 going to Pangasinan saying you have to give credit where credit is due. Ferdinand Marcos did a lot of things for Ferdinand Marcos Sr. did a lot of things for the Ilocano people, and that enabled her to be endeared, to be loved by a lot of Ilocanos at that time. So enabling her, votes from Pangasinan to get a shoot to rise, to increase. So as what have been mentioned by Frank a while ago. So all things considered, there's a lot of things to be said. Wala tayong time. Yes, ang taas-taas ng chance si Bongbong Marcos manalo sa election. That's why we have to keep on talking about it. We have to thank you, John, for this platform to talk about it. And I hope there will be a lot more, discussion about democracy and disinformation, especially because now it's not just elections as usual. It's the elections of our lives, especially for younger people like me.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. We should continue this sometime in the future. Ash Presto in Singapore, Frank Simato in Baguio. Thank you for your time. That's it for us. That's it for us tonight. Join us again next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Follow us on the campaign trail because it isn't just elections as usual. This is John Nery. Good night.